My guest today is Dr. Natalie Cawley. Dr. Natalie is a psychologist, a psychotherapist, and specializes in attachment. So she calls herself an attachment therapist. Works with children in care after a very long career of working in the healthcare sector with patients with cancer and so on and so forth. Natalie and I, believe it or not, got in touch on Instagram, and she told me about her book coming out on the 25th of July. So it's about time for you to pre-order it. Her book is called Just About Coping. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly what the whole world is trying to do today. Everyone is trying to cope. Brilliant title, incredible content, and a wonderful vulnerability about Natalie also sharing her own story, not just the story of some of her patients. And we agreed this is definitely worth talking about here on Slow-Mo. So Natalie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, just about coping. Yes. I think that's it. Basically, I should just ask you to speak for the rest of the podcast. This is truly our modern life. Really, the idea of
absolutely
just trying to keep up. What made you choose this? What in your personal story, if you want, made you think about this?
I think it's a culmination of socially people always asking me, what's the strangest thing you've ever heard, or what do clients come in with or patients come in with in therapy? And I realised that people are fascinated by other people's stories. I think on the one hand, to normalise themselves and think, oh, I'm not strange, I'm not odd, somebody else
not
is
weird,
doing this. Yeah.
There are lots of others feeling the same way.
Yeah, but we all kind of cover it up, and we all don't feel confident in talking about it. Yeah. These little nuances and little behaviours or things we do to get through the day or get through stressful times.
Yeah.
And then I think people are fascinated to hear also because maybe they think by comparison, oh, maybe I'm coping a bit better. Maybe it's not as bad as it could be. So I wanted to bring all that together and make the book hopefully a therapeutic experience by reading it, because you hear about all these different coping mechanisms. And then one of my messages is to try and dismantle shame. So within that, I thought I'd better practice what I preach and tell my own story and my own brushes with mental health and my own ways of coping, the maladaptive and the more adaptive, hopefully.
Do you think that, strange question, many of those who study psychology and psychotherapy come from a place where they want to understand for themselves first?
Yes, absolutely.
That's so interesting. Does that make a better therapist?
It's a question they asked me during training. Why did you pick this? And I found that answer a bit difficult. And actually, my supervisor at the time offered an interpretation, which was I was trying to find control. I felt quite chaotic at times emotionally. I didn't cope with heartbreak or endings very well. And I think sometimes knowing information or knowing how things work make you feel like you can control it a bit more or regulate yourself a bit more, which sometimes true and sometimes not, I'd say.
And sometimes not needed at all, I think. So tell me your story. You were not always the one that understood therapy very well, and accordingly, sometimes you really had your own mental health episodes, if you want.
Yeah. So I say the book covers every breakthrough, break up and break down.
I loved that. Breakthrough, break up and break down, yes.
Yeah. It opens with heartbreak, and I would say from revisiting that and writing it, I was definitely experiencing chronic anxiety, dissociative episodes, and struggling quite a lot. And my way of coping with that was distraction, numbing, keeping busy, trying to take on more and more work. a bit like, as you say, unstressable. We have found numbing to be adaptive. And then there's various things that happen throughout my journey. There's a loss that shocks me. I have an accident where I have post-trauma response afterwards.
Accident, like a car accident or something?
Yeah, it was I haven't actually explained in the book what took place because I'm worried about legal.
My God, living in the UK.
But yeah, I was involved in an accident and my neck was broken in 2 places.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That is a serious accident.
Yeah.
You just put it like, and my neck was broken in 2 places, and
I've reframed it.
and how like what? And how did you recover from that?
I didn't realise it was broken for 10 days.
No, and Natalie.
Yeah, I thought it was whiplash. So I was working, I was driving, I was drinking alcohol to try and numb the pain. I was doing all sorts of things.
How old were you?
30.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And one day I was just in pain at work and I thought I'll go around to A&E and just say, give me something for the pain. And they took a look at me and said, I think we need to x-ray you. And I just thought, I've not got time for this. I've got patience. I remember thinking, I was on my way to get a coffee. I don't want that to be held up.
It matters. Coffees matter.
Priorities.
What broken neck? You guys don't understand priorities in life.
Yeah, and then they stretchered me. They strapped me to a stretcher, and then, I had spinal surgery at King's.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so after that, I also didn't realise, which is brilliant being a therapist and psychologist, that I had essentially PTSD. And it was my therapist that pointed that out to me. So I guess that's, do as I say, not as I do, sort of. Not self-reflecting very much.
Why do you think? Why were you so control-driven or control-focused? Why were you? Because I know a lot of people, especially, we write about it in Unstressable as well, where the escape is, look, life is going, it's ticking, don't interrupt me. And we just keep it exactly as it's ticking. Any deviation from that is not welcomed, even a broken neck.
Yeah.
Why do we get into that?
I think it's the fear of the unknown. I think it's paths are set out for us early on. Maybe there's expectations either given by parents or the self. And I suppose it's if you attach failure to that, to deviating from the path, or...
So you would tell yourself that I failed if I couldn't keep on the path I drew for myself.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think so.
Yeah. I'm not like that. I have to say, I was talking to Hannah, my wonderful wife, recently, and one of the things that really gets to me is when I feel trapped without control. Different than out of control. I don't care if I'll wave my hands in the air and absolutely enjoy every minute of it if something's out of control. But if I'm trapped, so there are no clear exits and I'm out of control, that really gets to me.
Yeah.
What's the difference, do you think?
Trapped is actually a big component in PTSD.
Okay.
So that sense of feeling trapped. They did some research about 2 disasters, 9/11 and the Boston bombing, I believe. And they looked at, so afterwards people either dispersed, or in the Boston one, people were kind of held. And afterwards, the PTSD symptoms were worse in those that were held in the vicinity because they felt trapped near the threat. And I think maybe that not having autonomy to move out of a situation makes us feel very vulnerable or frightened.
Frustrated in my case.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Where
does that come
shall we
from?
start my therapy session?
Yeah, I was just going to ask.
It is so incredible when you sit next to a therapist, and as soon as you tell them something like that, they start asking questions.
Yeah.
It's like, so what exactly?
My body language changed.
So, but what were you going to ask?
Where did that come from? When did you notice
I don't know. I noticed it because I rarely ever am stressed. And
Congratulations.
I rarely ever am. I think it's age as well. Very few things. With age, you start to realize that very few things really matter. Actually, most of what we really give value to is not that important. And 90% of what you're looking for is going to happen. We only almost always obsess about the remaining 10% anyway. But the week leading up to releasing Unstressable and the week after were probably the most stressful weeks of my entire life. My mom was dying, and my mom is a very, very big thing in my life because she, as much as most of my intellect, if you want, the processor comes from my dad, my mom really was almost the entire database, how she handled things, how independent she was. And on top of that, I had so many challenges. Silly things like losing my wallet, so having no government IDs to fix certain things that needed to be fixed in such difficult time. And at the same time, having a business deal that became sort of unethical, if you want. Unethical. Being around unethical people really gets to me. That's the feeling of being trapped. And then Hannah and I sat down to think about it, because I get lots of hits from the left side that are unexpected. It's often in my life. Often it's because I do so much, some things will always go wrong. But then this really trapped me. At the same time, I had all of the plan for the book launch, so I had to show up, and we kept thinking about what was wrong. Why did I feel more stressed in those situations than the typical something breaking and me taking care of it. And it was because of the feeling of being trapped. The business deal, the issue was not the loss or the challenge. The issue was that I promised my team certain things, so I needed them to I needed to secure their path to that thing. And then, the unethical side of it meant that instead of just saying, okay, that I'm going to shut this thing down, I had to actually deal with the unethical person to solve it. And of course, losing your mom is a big, like, you're trapped. You're completely trapped. You know that she's going. And at the same time, that you're going to have to leave next week to do the book, launch, and you don't know if she's going to be there when you're done. And so being trapped is a very interesting. I've been thinking about this very deeply. And I don't recall traumas. Maybe my memory is quite vague. I actually don't think of any part of my life as a traumatic part. I always had those progressive, annoying experiences, but even losing my son didn't count in my mind as a trauma. It was more of an emotional challenge, if you want. Don't be the therapist. That's now your turn to speak.
I suppose I'm just thinking about feeling trapped in the incongruence of your values and your beliefs, and then this unethical situation and feeling responsibility for others.
Yeah.
That feels quite...
Very, very, very trapping, yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of tension in that of which way to go. And I suppose a lot of people feel trapped in grief and in loss, and not feeling like they can move through that experience.
Definitely, grief has a very interesting finality to it. Because Ali's not coming back. We know that. My mom's not coming back. We know that. My brother and sister left early in the year. They're not coming back. We know that. But my perception of life and death is very different. So I actually feel that death is more freedom than being trapped, and that we're all getting there anyway. It is quite interesting because when you look at those 3 weeks, I think the word coping sounds exactly right. That, what I was attempting to do is to just, I really can't solve any of it, okay? And I just can sort of deal with it, keep the ship afloat, if you want. Is that what you mean by coping?
Yeah. And how were you coping? Can I ask that?
She's the therapist, really. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but I have a very clear ability of doing what I can, and what I cannot, I accept. And, yes, as much as I would have wanted my mom to stay forever, I also have that keen ability to remember that my mom was 85 and that she brought so much into my life, right? And, I always tell people about heartbreaks and loss and so on, that you can't feel the negativity of a heartbreak unless you felt the love. So can you focus equally on both the blessing and the loss? Because if you do, it becomes at least more balanced than just thinking that, oh, my mom's leaving, life is unfair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I loved what you said about, I think I heard it rather than read it, about framing it as Ali lived.
Ali lived such a beautiful life, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom lived, and I think that's the truth of the matter, is that there is so much beauty and joy and blessings in life. But perhaps we're attached to those so much that when they go away, we forget that we ever had them. It's very different than a balanced view where you actually know that you had them, you enjoyed them, that they were a blessing, that you've never really earned them when you really think about it, most of the blessings in our life. And that, like everything, they will go too. Life is a zero-sum game.
Yeah. A lot of people refuse to grieve at first, and it can be hard to get people even to go into that transformative process.
Yeah.
So it's amazing to frame it as, that person brought me so much love and joy.
Yeah, it's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be the therapist.
Sorry.
So tell me about your side of how you were coping when you were going through your difficult times. You mentioned heartbreak first, so clearly heartbreak is a big topic.
Yes, there's heartbreak throughout the book, and losses, and relationships with people with varying degrees of mental illness. I don't want to give too much away. And the way I cope is the adaptive ways I cope, I would say, is I have always talked to myself out loud.
Have you?
Yes.
Okay.
And that is something that I used to feel embarrassed about or ashamed about. But now I realise that that's part of kind of the inner companion coming out and trying to put a bit of distance and a bit of self-compassion to things. Mm-hmm. So that's a way that I cope.
Do you talk to yourself nicely out loud?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I think we have to combat, we're all very good at listening to that persecutory negative voice, and we have to build the self-companion voice to counteract that. Mm-hmm. And that's what I try to do out loud to break the negative cycle of the voice.
So give me an example.
I'll even say things. I've caught myself saying, I wouldn't do that if I was you. But I think it's about me. I am me. I think it's the distancing. It is like a dialogue then with somebody that's trying to look out for you and take care of you, rather than just be the voice saying, you can't do this, or do you remember that time you embarrassed yourself, or you're a failure, or whatever that voice says.
Mm. So you call yourself an attachment therapist. What is that?
I think everything is relational and about connection. So even clinical mental health difficulties, schizophrenia, is a loss of connection with other people. People having psychosis is a loss of connection. They feel isolated. And I think everything comes down to how we relate to other people, the attachments we have, the quality of those attachments. That's how we understand the world, understand ourselves, regulate ourselves. And every coping mechanism, no matter how strange or maladaptive, has some sort of origin story, probably from those early developmental experiences. And they started as a survival strategy to bond, to get that attention, to get that input that you needed. It's just that they don't adapt with you over time and context. So then the coping mechanism can become the problem itself.
So as a child, you go through a specific experience and you find a coping mechanism and then you adapt that for the rest of your life. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So I have a lot of patients. I'm surprised by the amount of patients that when I say, what are your emotional needs? They'll say, I don't know. Or I've had a patient say, I don't have any needs. And when you track back to their early experiences at home, they were either marginalised or scapegoated, or for whatever reason, mum and dad didn't have the capacity. And so they took on a role, maybe as mediator, maybe as clown, and then they've stayed as that in all their relational encounters. And they marginalise their own needs in their own minds, and they stay in that role that's not really working for them anymore.
Because they couldn't get their needs met as children, they basically say it's better not to have needs rather than to crave those needs and be disappointed.
Yes, yeah.
How does one discover that?
We have to go backwards, and there's numerous tools you can use. One I like to use is the lifeline. So draw a straight line. This is you when you were born. This is you now, and then just plot the highs and the lows. And you get an idea of what memories, what experiences were significant and important. As they start doing that, often other memories come up from earlier on. And then asking things like, what would happen at home if you fell down or you were sick or you needed looking after? Who would you go to? What would that be like? Or how was it to be angry at home or upset at home? What was permitted, what was allowed, what was happening for you at that time.
And you know, basically by finding out those negative moments or positive moments as well are influential.
Positive are hugely influential as well, and I believe relationships can heal people. So as much as they can have a negative impact, they can also have a hugely positive impact. So it's about finding out both and what was meaningful.
What is attachment in that case?
Attachment is the bond you have with those early caregivers that set up your regulatory systems, the brain, how responsive that is, the limbic system, how you learn to cope with feeling threat. Have you heard of the strange situation?
Mm-mm.
So they did a study with 1-year-olds, and they put them in a room and they left them with a parent playing, and then they did certain steps. So they took the parent away and saw how the child behaved. They put a stranger in the room and saw how the child behaved. And they categorised the children from this experiment into 3 broad categories. And they found that from looking at those people later on, when they were, I think they were about 25, they behaved in a way that was in accordance with how they were as a toddler. So, for instance, the ambivalent child, when parent left, they would be inconsolable, panicked, can't soothe themselves.
Yeah, I know some of those kids, yeah.
And when parent comes back, they're very angry, or they're still very upset. They can't calm down.
Yeah, how come you left me?
Yes, yeah, how dare you abandon me? I didn't know you were coming back. Or the avoidant child will just go off to a corner on their own and play with their own toys and just kind of go into that, which is the equivalent, I guess, of us throwing ourselves into work or cutting ourselves off and just dealing with it internally. But the stress is still there. The cortisol levels are still spiked.
You said 3 categories and the third.
Oh, sorry. Or secure, which is obviously the child that can regulate, can respond to the parent when it comes back in. And they're the children that are more able to regulate themselves because they've learned that if something terrible happens to me, mum or dad will come and rescue me and help me.
I think I wouldn't have noticed. Is that a category at all? At least that's what my mom used to describe it. It's like I was sort of not really in this world. I'm a bit high as a child.
Okay.
Does that exist as a category?
Yeah, I mean, I want to be careful not to pathologise. Maybe you were just very good at regulating yourself and very confident that mum and dad would come back.
Or not, who cares? Like,
if not, I can get on with it myself.
So we take those and they become our coping mechanisms as we grow older. Is that what you're trying to teach?
Yeah, so an ambivalent child may develop some maladaptive coping mechanisms so that their needs are so big and so great and they haven't been met that they might end up doing things like it's going very pathologizing, but self-harm is something they might do because they're going to get the pseudo care from maybe hospital staff or therapists. They might struggle to form other relationships, so they might struggle with coping with romantic relationships, and they might have interpersonal problems. They find ways of trying to get those unmet needs met.
So I have to ask the question then at 2 layers, at 2 levels. Of course, we need to talk about if someone is feeling that themselves, what should they notice about their coping mechanism and how can they change it? But if you notice that in your child,
yes,
what would you do about it? If your child is the kind of child that will, what is it called? Throw a fit or something like that when you disappear for 2 minutes, that's constantly crying if you don't pick them up. That's clearly going to develop into an attachment style that basically is saying, I need you here all the time. What would you do about that?
I would reflect on myself. So I would think about how much I'm talking to the child about their emotional language. So, oh, you fell down. That must have really hurt you. That wasn't nice. Checking how much I'm on my phone and how much I'm engaging fully with the child. Trying to encourage positive self-soothing. So giving them teddies or things and then playing, making sure there's lots of engaged play, things like that will help regulate them, and get them to make sure I'm always answering those bids for connection. So whenever they're trying to get my attention, try and respond.
So not the opposite, because some schools will say let them cry until they cry their heads off.
Yeah.
That's horrible, isn't it?
I think that's horrible. There was I can't remember the name of it, but there was a leaving babies in the crib to cry. Yeah, that's quite frightening for me, I think.
Yeah, I always say it's the worst thing I've ever done. If I have any regrets in my life, at all actually, probably at the very top of it was when Aya was an infant. Aya, my daughter, that was the time when this was very fashionable. It's like, just leave her in the crib and she will cry for 20 minutes and then learn that nobody's coming, so she'd fall asleep. Shit, yes, that's exactly what we don't want to teach them, that nobody's coming, because that basically creates a disconnection of some sort, if you want.
Yeah, I don't think that they're in isolation. You're clearly very connected and.
Oh, Aya and I are one now. but it is something that, again, I share it because I think other parents. I see it all the time as well, because I'm on aeroplanes and in airports, and when you see a child crying, it doesn't matter if the parent's carrying it or not. Sometimes the parent is carrying it to make the child feel safe, right? To make the child feel loved, and sometimes the parent's just carrying it to make the child shut the hell up, right? And it's very different because one of them makes the child safe, the other one makes the child very unsafe because they can read through your behavior like, shut up, baby, shut up, baby, shut up. That doesn't work for them. And I'm a huge advocate of the idea of just pour love on them and they'll eventually calm down. Like they're feeling unsafe somehow. Even though, of course, some will say, oh, but you're spoiling them. You're making them feel that by crying they can get what they want. And I think that's really where the challenge is. So if you've been that child and then you grow older and now that's your attachment style. So if your boyfriend doesn't text, you start to throw a fit and you get very angry and so on.
Yes.
What is that little smile?
I see that a lot.
Yeah.
I've seen it in myself.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that come into therapy with that as their problem, and they've been called too much, or they have too many emotional needs, and they're struggling in their relationship, or they can't stay in relationships.
Okay, so what should they do other than come to you as a therapist?
That's
that's the best answer, but yeah, second best is
awareness, reflecting on that, acknowledging that these are defense mechanisms that are coming up and they should be respected because they're just trying to get that need met, but trying to find some self-soothing, self-regulatory things before you seek for that external need to be met by someone else.
Self-soothing is a very interesting way of looking at it. Is if you're not complete within yourself, you would constantly seek that attention from outside you.
Yes.
It's really interesting. So if you're anxious about the other person not being there for you, are you there for yourself is an interesting question to ask.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think a lot of it comes back to what's happening within the self. And sometimes there's a loss of trust in the self. There's fear that we won't be able to cope with things, and we project that onto the other person and say, you're not meeting my need. Well, maybe we're setting them up to fail because they can never fully meet that need, because that's based on multiple experiences of feeling rejected or feeling abandoned, or that could be real or perceived abandonment. It may have happened. It may be that you're cued to see that and feel that way.
The opposite is also true, I think. I'm guessing here, so correct me if I'm wrong. If someone is constantly trying to be in touch, sending messages, constantly taking care of the other person's feeling that they are seen and heard and observed and, getting all the attention they need, it could probably be the reason, resulting from the same attachment style. That this is how they feel, that this is how they want things to be, so they broadcast out in hope that others don't feel the same way, or in hope maybe that they are seen by doing that.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. People often expect other people's experiencing to be like theirs, and in trying to meet that need in the other person, if they're an avoidant attachment style or somebody that shuts down in the face of emotions, that's like screaming and banging on a shut door. That's not going to make that door open. It's going to make them hold it shut even more.
Shut it even more, yeah. So let's talk about avoidant attachment styles. So these are the kids that will go to the corner and play on their own and basically say,
I'm self-sufficient.
Yeah.
At 2.
Yeah. Is that me? I don't know, honestly. So if my child is like that, what do I do? Do I keep them that way, or do what does it develop into as an adult? What coping mechanism does it develop?
It develops into usually fierce independence, being quite driven and self-focused.
Ooh, sounds very familiar.
But you're very nurturing and very personable. Yeah. Not saying people with avoidance attachment style aren't that, but it's hard sometimes to get that balance because they are so focused on meeting their own emotional needs. And I think actually there's a bit of a badge of honour in that. And I've been guilty of that where, I don't need anybody else. I can deal with this myself. And somehow that makes you stronger. But it actually does the opposite. We need co-regulation and support. to cope.
So these are the kinds of people that, if they don't get attention from their, partner or whatever, they'll just go like, I don't need a partner anyway.
Yes.
That's not a lovely place to be.
No.
Okay. And that basically because as a child, they sort of feel that it doesn't matter what I want, I'm never going to get it somehow.
I think they learn to be mistrusting of the world, but trusting of themselves. So they self-rescue a lot, self-soothe, but don't expect that need to be met always from the external.
Interesting. So the opposite, basically.
Yeah, because the ambivalent thinks a lot of the world, but not very much about them, not a lot of themselves.
In that case, basically, those people are more likely to be lonely, are more likely to be workaholics.
Yeah.
Okay, so if my child is like that, what do I do? And if I'm an adult and I'm like that, what do I do?
Yeah. It's about, in adults therapy, it's about trying to encourage those people to have open vulnerability and to learn to test opening up, trusting and relying on others. And that's not always going to go well.
It doesn't, yeah.
So sometimes they come back to me and they said, you said to do this and it didn't go well.
Yeah.
But you've got to keep...
Because the people that they open up to are not always predictable, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So it could reaffirm their life script.
Exactly.
It's like,
yes.
I told you when I closed down, things are okay. Now you told me to open up and look at what happened.
Yeah, I'm no longer in control and I feel shame or I feel chaos and it feels incongruent to go against your defense mechanisms. The brain says, hang on, this has been working for us for a long time, don't change it. So if you try and force change and then it doesn't go well, the brain's kind of saying, well, told you.
Yeah, and the brain's almost actually actively looking for affirmation of what it believes, right?
Yes.
So okay. And as a child, basically, does that mean that you're trying to you should be in their life more to make them avoid being distant?
I think it's about connected time. So I think the time that you do spend with your child should be trying to play, build emotional language. I remember my brother, when he was little, he didn't speak. And so we didn't know whether it was his hearing or autism or, down this path. And I remember my mum taking him in to the doctor and her saying, what's his favourite thing to play with? And she said, well, he goes round on this gardening thing with wheels. He just goes around the house in it and puts packets of crisps in it. And the doctor said, well, that's not really helping his language development, is it? And she thought of that because she, just playing, but it's about thinking about how do I engage and help.
It's so interesting how every one of us thinks of the rest of the world as themselves. And I'm clearly odd. So, but it's so interesting how tiny little adjustments in a child's progress, especially at a young age, become such a defining topic in the future, right? It really could make you a very different person that you cried a few times and were not attended to or something like that.
Well, there's the concept of, have you heard about the good enough mother? It's a concept by a psychoanalyst called Donald Winnicott. And it's basically saying you don't have to be perfect as a parent. All parents are going to be stressed and tired, and you're going to have those moments where you don't meet the need perfectly. But as long as you're there consistently enough and responsive, then that will help the child to learn to regulate and help those things form.
And good enough is measured as?
That's a good question. Good enough is...
trying your best.
Trying your best, yeah, and coping.
I don't know. I think people should be having kids only after they go through a driving test of some sort. I think we've caused too much damage, all of us. It is something that is important. And I think if someone is just trying to cope, they're probably not ready yet to get someone else to teach to cope.
Some patients have had children as a way of coping. And I've had more than one patient that have had multiple children, 13 or 14 children.
Oh my God.
Because they love the nurture, the bonding, when they're a tiny infant. And then when they become a toddler and they start saying no and that's mine and having autonomy and walking off, their emotional need isn't being met, so they have another baby.
Wow. Okay, and do they remember the name of the first one?
There's a patient in the book who I didn't realise until I put it together after a few sessions, but she named all of her children after characters in horror films.
Wow.
So she had a Freddie and a Carrie and put them all together. I thought, oh, there's a theme here.
Okay, and why was that?
Unclear. She was definitely one that was having children to meet her own needs. Maybe there was a link between that being quite terrorising for her, subconsciously building relationships. I can't honestly say.
Wow. Okay. Keep going. Interesting client cases.
Yeah, there's lots. There's lots in the book. It is my memoir, and it talks about my experiences, but then it talks about lots and lots of patients that come to see me, all their different ways of coping, the good, the bad, the strange, the bizarre. There's a lot of stories in there.
I should definitely read that. I think that's quite interesting. And if I find myself in one of them, you have a recommendation of how I can become less bizarre.
Well, I hope that it gives insight. So I try and explain in that person's story where it came from, what function it's serving. And when you read it, the hope is that as a reader, you read it with compassion, not with ridicule, or because you get the context and the understanding, and then you think, oh, okay, maybe that's not as shameful as I thought.
So Hannah and I, we have our morning coffees together, and Hannah is very secretive about her clients. She would never share anything, but she has that therapist mind in her all the time. So she's constantly talking about, did you know that if this happens as a child and then you grow up to be this, and then she's almost like thinking out loud about cases that she's not telling me about. Just to try and make sense of them in her mind. And I'm fascinated by it. Like, I know it sounds very like strange romance, but these are some of my most, one of the things I adore about that woman is how intelligent she is. And so I'm sitting there, and I have to admit, it just gives you so much compassion.
Yeah. When
you recognize sort of the underlying reasons behind what some people do, right? And it's sort of almost like you want to hug everyone, basically. It's like, I get it, right? This is an actual, if I were exposed to this, I would come up with the same conclusion and accordingly behave the same way. And so I think that the idea that you're able to, of course, with confidence, share some cases, that becomes a very eye-opening. So do you think the reader of this is a therapy student as well, or anyone who is who's just interested in what goes on with us? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hope so, because it talks about my journey through training and what that's actually like, what we learn and how we learn. And it also, I go into it with very much a God complex for doctors and psychiatrists and therapists. And I learn through multiple stories that we're all fallible. And there's a psychiatrist where I'm the junior and I'm presented in this situation with this person who's in emotional distress. And the senior psychiatrist jumps out the window because he feels like he can't cope. So there's little, there's loads of wisdom.
You mean actually jump off the...
Actually jumped out the window, yeah. It was a ground floor, thankfully. But he was like, this is too dangerous.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow. It's not teaching you much.
Yeah. Teaching you to not feel trapped, maybe. So there's lots of wisdom from my senior supervisors, but then there's also moments where you go, they're just humans as well, and they're just coping.
I think this is going to be a very entertaining read, with knowledge and things to learn from it, but definitely eye-opening. Thanks for coming to speak about it, and I hope people will also give it a shot. And I believe that perhaps the most interesting side of everyone around you, on public transport, at the office, in the supermarket, is it's almost entirely about coping.
Yes, I think everybody is just about coping.
Everybody's just about coping. Thank you so much, Natalie. Thank you for being here.
I really appreciate it.
And thank you all for joining me today. This is definitely going to be my read on the next flight. I'll probably start by just flipping through pages and seeing randomly what the universe is telling me. But I may come back to all of you and say, oh my God, I found myself in one of the cases. Until then, keep listening, keep helping me grow this podcast so that I can get more interesting conversations, and keep trying to give yourself the luxury and the space for a bit of slow down time, because it doesn't matter how busy you are this week, there's always a tiny bit of time to slow down. I love you all for listening, and I will see you next time.